Step right up and grab a seat here at bar 355 for this week's Noir Alley. I'm Eddie Muller, and it's Noirvember. Not just here, but everywhere. And I'm capping off several weeks of relatively obscure films with a personal favorite. Made by the B Unit at Columbia Pictures in 1947, it's Blind Spot, a 73-minute programmer with a clever hook and lots of interesting business roiling beneath the surface. Loyal Noir Alley viewers know that it's a point of principle with me to acknowledge writers, not just directors and actors. Although movies are the ultimate collaborative art, nothing happens without the writers. Actors would have nothing to do or say, directors wouldn't have scenes to stage and shoot. Yet writers never have gotten the respect they deserve, within the business or from the critics and supposed scholars who've made careers out of writing about film. In fact, it's the folks who write about movies who are most guilty of slighting the people who created the stories on which some of their favorite films are based. So, until artificial intelligence plagiarizes everything past the point of no return, I'll continue to give credit where it's due. All of this is to give context to the plot of today's film, in which Chester Morris plays a novelist who gets entwined in a murder plot of his own devising. Unfortunately, in addition to being a writer of serious literary fiction, he's also a blackout drunk, which means he can't remember how to solve the murder scenario he concocted out of thin air. It doesn't help that the victim is his publisher, to whom he told the story. A British writer by the name of Barry Perrone devised the clever premise, a riff on the popular locked room subgenre of mystery fiction. But it is screenwriter Martin Goldsmith who brings the puzzle pieces to life, fleshing out the low-rent proceedings with distinctive characters and lots of humorous and mean-spirited observations about the craft and business of writing for a living. If Goldsmith's name rings a bell, that's because he was the instigator of two of the most famous noir films ever. Detour, the 1945 noir touchstone that Goldsmith adapted from his novel of the same name, and The Narrow Margin, an original story he concocted with co-writer Jack Leonard. Goldsmith wrote other books, films, and TV shows, but those are the two that comprise his cinema legacy. Now, part of the reason there aren't more is because Goldsmith resolutely avoided Hollywood, dropping in only occasionally to sell a story or bang out a screenplay. Otherwise, he led a nomadic life, restlessly traveling the world with his wife Estella. They once lived for 5 months in a cave in Baja California, where Goldsmith wrote one of his novels. It is safe to assume that his wryly bitter observations about writers and publishers, and by extension, movie producers, comes from Goldsmith's personal experience. Blind Spot came out at a time when Hollywood finally decided to take alcoholism seriously, at least on screen. Prior to Billy Wilder's 1945 drama The Lost Weekend, which won the Best Picture Oscar, drunks in the movies were almost always used as comedy relief. Several actors made careers out of always being plastered on screen. In noir, problem drinking was often a plot device, used much the same way as amnesia, causing the protagonist to lose a crucial memory, which forces them to play detective. Dan Duryea did just that in Black Angel, made the previous year at Universal. Here, Chester Morris has to walk a fine line, pun maybe intended, since he needs to make the audience empathize with the pathetic character of writer Jeffrey Andrews, while in this post-Lost Weekend period, he couldn't make him a sodden buffoon. As with alcohol itself, everyone's tolerance level will vary. Co-starring with Chester Morris is Constance Dowling, who was also in Black Angel with a drunken Dan Duryea. She and her sister Doris came into the movie business hot, making brief but memorable impressions in a number of post-war Hollywood pictures before deciding to continue their careers in Europe. I'll have more to say about Constance after the film. Also featuring Hungarian actor Stephen Garay, familiar from many noir films, here is a rare locked room noir, Blind Spot. All in all, a silly but stylish diversion, but one with enough edginess and strange bits of business to make it, in my estimation, one of the better B pictures produced at Columbia after the war. Screenwriter Martin Goldsmith's snarky insights into publishing, especially the class distinctions between serious literature and mystery fiction, are still applicable today. I know many authors who broke into publishing by writing crime fiction, only to disparage their genre origins once they crossed over to mainstream bestseller lists. I don't know who came up with that barroom scene where Chester Morris rubs his grizzled mug in Constance Dowling's gorgeous blonde hair, but it is a uniquely odd and erotic bit of business. This was a stroke of genius worthy of one of Erich von Stroheim's fetish-heavy silent films. I doubt it was written in the script, because given how these things got made, Martin Goldsmith wasn't sure who'd be cast, or that she'd have such a gorgeous mane. Maybe Chester Morris came up with it himself. After all, he and Dowling had just appeared together in Boston Blackie and the Law, the latest in Columbia's series about a crook turned crime solver. When the series began in 1941, it pretty much salvaged Morris's flagging career. He'd made 12 Boston Blackies by the time he did this picture. Who knows? Perhaps Constance Dowling came up with the hair idea herself. Maybe it was something Elia Kazan did, back when the Broadway director had an illicit affair with Dowling after she'd moved from being a showgirl to a legit actress. Their backstage romance was fairly common knowledge in New York drama circles, and it was Kazan's refusal to leave his wife for Dowling that made her pack her bags and follow her younger sister Doris to Hollywood. She appeared in a bunch of B pictures between 1944 and 47, and certainly had the chops and charisma to be a star. But in 1948, she and her sister kissed off Hollywood and moved to Italy, where they both continued their careers. While Doris was co-starring in Bitter Rice, one of the most popular international films of the era, Constance became muse and lover to writer Cesare Pavese, one of Italy's most renowned and influential authors. After Dowling broke off the affair, Pavese dedicated his last novel to her, as well as one of his most famous poems, Death Will Come With Your Eyes. And he meant it. Pavese killed himself in 1950 with an overdose of barbiturates. Dowling returned to the United States and ended up marrying screenwriter Yvonne Tours, who was just beginning a second career as a producer of sci-fi and underwater spectacles, if you can call them that. He produced the last picture Dowling acted in, 1954's Gog, about renegade robots run amok. She and Tours would have 4 children before her very untimely death at only 49 years of age. Now for a trivia question. What's the connection between today's film and the first all-talking motion picture produced in Hollywood? The answer is director Robert Gordon, who started in show business as a child actor named Bobby Gordon. At 13, he played the young Al Jolson in 1927's The Jazz Singer. He obviously soaked up a lot of knowledge on movie sets throughout the 30s, and in 1947, Blind Spot would be his first job as a director, which he'd continue to do mostly on TV for the next 2 decades. Martin Goldsmith, the screenwriter of Blind Spot, ended up dedicating himself more to social causes than his writing career, but there was one very notable credit yet to come on his resume. In 1964, he wrote an episode of The Twilight Zone called The Encounter, a 2-hander starring Neville Brand and a pre-Star Trek George Takei. It was a story of racial hatred and guilty consciences, and it has the distinction of being the only episode of The Twilight Zone deemed too provocative for public broadcast. It never aired. Fortunately, when the full run of the show became available digitally, Goldsmith's episode was returned to the show's chronology. It's easy to find online, and it is definitely worth a look, especially for the actors' performances. Next week marks an end to our run of little-known noirs. I'll be back with a classic thriller from one of the world's great filmmakers, Akira Kurosawa. High and Low stars Toshiro Mifune, and if you haven't seen Spike Lee's recent remake with Denzel Washington, here's a chance to watch the original first. Until then, see you in the shadows.
Next on TCM, The Beggar's Opera, then The Prince and the Showgirl, and later, Devotion. TCM is committed to the classics tonight.